So in honor of the upcoming 16th anniversary of the Charter for Compassion, let me share some moments and flourishes, I hope, of inspiration for you personally, but perhaps also for us too as a community. And let me begin by sharing what I would like to consider the heart of the Charter. And it begins with these words: "The principle of compassion lies at the heart of all religions, ethical and spiritual traditions, calling us always to treat all others as we ourselves would wish to be treated." It goes on to say that compassion compels us to relieve suffering. And this is something that Karen says a lot, both in her speeches, but also in her books. She uses the beautiful phrase of dethroning. To dethrone ourselves, she says, from the center of our own world, and to honor the sacred worth of every person. And of course, as we know, it's a fundamental principle too of the Unitarian Universalist church and movement. Karen Armstrong also said, "We already know what to do. The question is, of course, will we do it?" And that's really the question of compassion, isn't it? We already know it matters. We already feel its truth deep in our bones, but the living of it and the doing of it is the work of a lifetime. So as you know, Karen's wish back in 2008 was a charter, something that we individually and collectively could literally sign up for. And compassion, the word compassion, the etymology of it, derives from the Latin patiri and the Greek pathein. Both of them mean to suffer, or in English, we would use the verb to undergo, or to experience in a very visceral way. And so therefore, compassion means to endure something with another person, to literally put ourselves in their shoes and to feel what they may be feeling at any given moment, or at least be open to that feeling. And as I would like to think of it, as entering generously into their point of view, their perspective, their particular moment. The golden rule, of course, as we know, asks us to look into our own hearts and discover what gives us pain, and then refuse under any circumstance whatsoever to inflict that pain on another. So this, of course, is not a new idea. If you watch the video, which I hope you do on YouTube, Karen tells the beautiful origins of it, of course, which interestingly began with Confucius 5 centuries before Christ. And the central thread to his teachings and what he urged his disciples should practice all day and every day was compassion. He taught and was convinced that by doing so and practicing compassion, it brings us into the transcendent values of what they called, and I don't know the tone of the language, unfortunately, because as you know, Chinese is a tonal language, but it's Ren, which means in English, human-heartedness. Now, those of you who know the story of Rabbi Hillel, and if you don't know the story, or rather if you do know the story, allow me to share it for a moment because it's one of my favorites. Rabbi Hillel, not a contemporary at the time of Jesus, but shortly before, recounts a story of being approached by an unbeliever. And this unbeliever said to Hillel that he would convert if Hillel would teach the whole of the Jewish teaching while standing on one leg. So allegedly, this is exactly what he did. He stood on one leg and he said this: "That which is hateful to you, do not do to others." That is the Torah. The rest is commentary. Now, go and study it. Fantastic. Now, what does the Charter say? If you get a chance, please Google it. The Charter for Compassion has an excellent, excellent website. But basically, it are these 5 major points, and I'll read them to you. It says this: we call upon all people, 1, to restore compassion to the center of morality and religion. 2, to return to the ancient principle that any interpretation of scripture or dogma that breeds violence, hatred, or disdain is illegitimate. 3, to ensure, and this is something very close to my heart, as you can imagine, to ensure that the youth and the young people of our world are given accurate and respectful information about other traditions, religions, and cultures. 4, to encourage a positive appreciation of cultural and religious diversity. And 5, to cultivate an informed empathy with the suffering of all human beings, even those we may regard as enemies. Now, of course, Karen and all of us know that it's not a feeling. Compassion is not a feeling, it's a practice. And of course, it's a discipline. It's a way of life that asks us to move from sympathy, feeling for, to empathy, feeling with, and then into solidarity, acting with. So of course it calls us not just to kindness, but to justice. And it does, as you discover, mean listening, really listening to those whose stories make us uncomfortable. And of course, it means standing beside those who are marginalized, even when it costs us something. Let me share with you a little story. A few years ago, in the aftermath of a hate crime, a group of neighbors gathered outside the home of a Muslim family whose windows had been shattered. The family was frightened, and the children couldn't sleep. One woman brought flowers, another brought food, and then one man stood guard outside the house that night, and then eventually others joined him. They took turns through all the week, just being there, quietly. When asked why, one of them said, "If compassion means anything, it has to be visible, especially when people are afraid." An essay that I wrote when I was doing my master's degree in interfaith studies, I did a focus on the aftermath of the Canterbury shootings in New Zealand. You may have remembered them. And my focus was on the response of the Maori people, because I don't know if you're aware, but when it happened, the Maoris, who have no connection themselves also with Muslims, came and performed grief hakas. They had, of course, nothing in common with them culturally or in any way. And in fact, of course, if you think about it, Maori people have much to be aggrieved about in terms of their loss of land and cultures and traditions. But on that day and in those days following, they stood in solidarity. And a beautiful word that I've learned recently in Hebrew. Those of you who speak Hebrew or understand it may recognize this word, kadosh. And I love it because it means that holiness applied to God is, in this word, kadosh, meaning separate or other or apart. And I would like to believe that true holiness is really drawing alongside the other. So let me finish with these few brief thoughts. For us as UU people, the Charter is not a creed that we sign. It should really be a compass that we follow, because it aligns so perfectly with our 7 principles and our mission to create a world of justice, equity, and interdependence. And to be compassionate, we must also be curious about others, about what they need, what they might not yet understand. It's a concern for all, and those, of course, who are outside our immediate groups and circles. And to remember that if we want to be a compassionate people, it's not about being right. It's just about being compassionate. And we must be humble. One of the teachings that we have on our youth program is we unpack the golden rule. And in fact, I don't know if you know this, but there is one above the golden rule, which we've called the platinum rule. And the platinum rule is a difference. And for those of you who like the nuance of words in the same way that I do, listen to this. The platinum rule says, do unto others what they would like to have done unto them. Somehow it changes the focus from us acting and thinking that we're doing good, but rather having compassion that maybe what we feel might be right might not be right for them. So I'm a big lover and follower and hope for the platinum rule. Karen Armstrong said, compassion is not an option. It, in fact, is the key to our survival as a species. Which is why, of course, it's not a soft, hallmarky, sentimental thing. It's spiritual, ethical strength. And when we cultivate compassion, I believe we're training the heart, we're widening it and its capacity to hold at the same time joy and grief, fear and hope, and grow hearts large enough for the whole of our human family. So the challenge I would like to make to us as a community is, could we see ourselves signing up to the Charter? Could we see ourselves becoming part of this incredible global network? I'm reminded of the words of the Archbishop Desmond Tutu, who said, do what you can, where you can. And I think that the Charter for Compassion is a beautiful way of, in some ways, making that sort of promise as a community and as an organization. We've done it here in South Africa. As part of our course, we've created a thing called a Charter for a Compassionate School. And who knows, maybe it's something that we can do in our communities, in our institutions that we either work with or for or alongside. Ask our leaders to. You may be pleased to know that Cape Town 10 years ago signed up as a city to the Charter. And one final little lovely flourish, and that is For those of you who don't know, Zoran Mamdani spent some of his formative years here in Cape Town, and he went to a madrasa, in fact, to the Claremont Main Road Mosque, whose imam was one of my supervisors for my master's degree. And so you can imagine the swell of pride that he and their community and Cape Townians are feeling. And there on the wall of the the Claremont Main Road Mosque is a framed copy of the Charter for Compassion. Thank you all for listening, and I hope you are as inspired as I am today by Karen and who she is and what she stands for. Normally, if we were together in person, we would, at this point, take a break, maybe also for not only for joys and concerns, but also to pass around the offering plate. So, of course, we're not in person. If you did want to donate, I know that the link is in the chat box there. And I believe that when we close today's service, Arlene is going to share some announcement with us. But before we do close, I'm going to play you one last postlude. But I also want to share one final inspiration with you. And by the way, something I know I have spoken about a couple of years ago, but if you are interested, Karen Armstrong has written a beautiful book called The 12 Steps to a Compassionate Life. It's an easy read, but a deeply inspiring one. And taken from her final chapter of that book is what I would like to share. It's called A Last Word in that book. Allow me to close with this. King Pasenadi, the Buddha's friend, fell into a deep depression when his wife died. He no longer felt at home anywhere and had taken to leaving his palace and driving for miles with his army, going aimlessly from one place to another. One day, he was driving through a park filled with huge tropical trees. Dismounting from his carriage, the king walked among their enormous roots, which were themselves as tall as a man, and he somehow felt consoled. Those ancient trees had inspired in him trust and confidence. They were quiet. No discordant voices disturbed their peace. They gave out a sense of being apart from the ordinary world, a place where one could take refuge from the cruelties of life. And as he contemplated these marvelous trees, the king was reminded of the Buddha, whose inner quiet had raised him above the petty disturbances in a world of clamorous egotism, and you could shelter with him in a crisis. So a truly compassionate person touches a chord in us that resonates with some of our deepest yearnings. People flock to such individuals because they seem to offer a haven of peace in a violent, angry world. And this is the ideal to which we all aspire, and it is not beyond our capacity. But even if we achieve only a fraction of this enlightenment and leave the world marginally better because we have lived in it, our lives would have been worthwhile. Thank you.
If you like this video, please like us on YouTube, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and click on the bell to be notified whenever we post a new video. Thank you.